Hi, I'm Dr. Rich Sherman. I'm going to spend the next few minutes telling you why every therapist who treats apparently abnormal psychological conditions needs to understand the biological basis of behavior, which frequently causes those conditions. I'm going to take you on a very superficial tour illustrating how abnormal functions within the body affect many of the behavioral problems we try to treat through behavioral interventions. My aims in exposing you to this material are, first, to help therapists who use talk therapies and other behavioral interventions to treat patients exhibiting behavioral problems recognize that many of these problems are caused or augmented by physiological malfunctions. Second, to help therapists realize that they can help many of their patients more if they're aware of the underlying physiological problems. And third, to interest these therapists in taking a clinically oriented course in the biological basis of behavior so they can learn to perform more effective assessments and interventions. Clinicians of all types and backgrounds spend much of their professional lives attempting to evaluate and treat abnormal behaviors, dysfunctional behaviors, and behavioral symptoms. When we talk about behavioral symptoms, we usually mean persistent behaviors that are unusual, disruptive, inappropriate, or cause problems for the patient and others who interact with the patient. Many clinicians are simply not aware that some functional disorders, such as non-cardiac chest pain, have well-demonstrated biological bases. Many are not aware that numerous abnormal behaviors, such as some anxiety reactions, have primarily biological rather than psychological causes. Others are not aware that physical illnesses and medications cause abnormal behaviors which some clinicians attempt to treat through interventions such as psychotherapy, cognitive restructuring, and etc. It's crucial that clinicians be aware of the biological basis of many behavioral abnormalities or symptoms so they can provide more effective interventions. The reality is that many of the behavioral problems we try to treat through behavioral interventions actually stem from physical problems, diseases, genetics, hormones and neurotransmitter, distribution and production problems, functional breathing problems, pheromones, maturation of the brain, nutritional deficiencies due to diet and processing problems, medication side effects, and a host of other biologically based problems. I'll only be highlighting a few of these during the talk. A key to understanding the importance of this topic is that for physiologically based disorders manifesting with mainly behavioral symptoms, unless the behavioral intervention can affect the underlying biological problem, the behavioral intervention is not likely to be particularly effective. Practitioners trying to help people exhibiting behavioral problems need to know when the problem is at least partially biologically based and what to do about it. The first system I'll discuss is respiration. Effects of abnormal respiratory patterns on stress responses, anxiety, and non-cardiac chest pain. Have you ever worked with a patient who seems to be anxious about everything, yet there's just nothing going on which either you or the patient feel should really cause all that much anxiety? Have you tried cognitive restructuring to get him or her to reinterpret the potential impact of the stressor, as well as the host of other usually effective strategies, but with minimal effect? Your patient may be among the large minority of patients who have been diagnosed with chronic anxiety disorders but actually have a breathing problem other than stress-reactive hyperventilation. Breathing slightly incorrectly for long periods leads to feelings of panic and anxiety. This is not related to stress response hyperventilation. Rather, the abnormal patterns lead to feelings of anxiety. Abnormal breathing patterns are frequently due to poor breathing habits or the patient being unaware of how he or she breathes. When most of the breathing problems are corrected, the chronic anxiety goes away without further intervention. Conversely, psychotherapeutic interventions usually don't have much effect on these patients. Next, let's look at a few of the effects of hormones on behavior. Oxytocin has effects which go far beyond its birth and lactation roles. Numerous studies show that it helps lubricate our every pro-social exchange, the thousands of acts of kindness that make human society possible. Research in humans suggests that oxytocin underlies the twin emotional pillars of civilized life, our capacity to feel empathy and trust. Researchers have found that genetic differences in people's responsiveness to the effects of oxytocin are linked to their ability to read faces, infer the emotions of others, feel distress at others' hardship, and even to identify with characters in a novel or Doonesbury. Early effects of numerous hormones on behavior include styles of juvenile play, learning styles, and aggression. This is among kids, not adults. Twin studies show that male-female twins behave more similarly in gender-based cognitive behaviors than do same-sex twins. In animal studies, this has been shown to be because hormones from the fetuses influence each other's development. Many studies have demonstrated that hormones profoundly influence the amount of aggression very young children showed during play, and then, when they get older, in classroom settings. This sadly carries over into the teen and adult years. Recall of previously learned information and learning itself are decreased when levels of thyroid, adrenal cortex hormones, and sex hormones decrease. Hormone deficiencies cause changes in memory, mood, and arousal, appetite, biological rhythms, stress responses, sexual behavior and gender identity, and numerous psychiatric disorders. Impulsive behavior and the dopamine pathway. Impulsive behavior is a common problem seen by behavioral therapists. Long-term follow-up studies show that successive behavioral interventions are difficult to maintain. Brain scans have recently demonstrated a common biological basis to many types of abnormal impulsiveness, from binge shopping addiction to serial dating, including rash decision-making. The extent to which the biological basis is expressed is, of course, altered by the environment. Impulsivity has long been linked to the neurotransmitter dopamine. Recent studies have demonstrated that abnormalities in dopamine producing and receiving systems underlie many of the problems with impulsiveness. The impact of genetics on behavior is up next. A great deal of our knowledge showing how much of a particular behavior is inherited is based on studies of identical twins separated at birth. Identical twins develop from a single cell, which splits into two embryos when the cell divides for the first time. Thus, they initially have identical genetic material and are always the same sex. Exceptions are incredibly rare and have only been documented several times. Fraternal twins develop from two eggs which were fertilized at about the same time. Thus, the children can have any combination of genetics from the parents. They can be different sexes. Identical and fraternal twins are occasionally separated at birth due to war, adoption, etc. The adoptive homes are usually quite different, so this gives a perfect situation for determining the proportions genetics and environment contribute to resultant behaviors. Twin studies have shown that problems can run in families due to environmental and behavioral influences, but are not inherited. For example, some studies indicate that both bulimia and childhood disabling fatigue run in families, but are actually not inherited. On the other hand, about 80% of the occurrence of schizophrenia is accounted for by genetics. Autism, unipolar manic depressive disorder, ADHD, and cognitive ability are inherited at least to some extent. Other twin studies showed that there were very large genetic components to childhood attention problems, social problems, externalizing behaviors, anxiety, and depression. The expression of the behavioral effects of genes is modified by physical and social factors within the environment, but can't be entirely masked. Shyness is a good example. A combination of gene alleles may code for 60% of shyness if fully expressed, but the person's upbringing may increase or decrease shyness to a very large extent. In other words, if 60% of a behavior is controlled by genes, you would think that 40% is left for the environment to influence. However, the environment can actually influence more than 40% of the behavior in some cases. In reality, there's a very real limit to how much environment can overcome genetics. So, attempts to treat excessive shyness through behavioral approaches have very real limitations to how much change they can produce. Incredibly enough, there is a clear genetic component to childhood violent behavior and juvenile delinquency. Examples of two studies are early onset delinquency is more genetic than late onset delinquency, and other studies have demonstrated that 37% of problem behaviors were due to genetics, with about half due to shared environment and 11% due to non-shared environment. Abnormal levels of anxiety and anxiety responses range from about 9% to largely predicted by genetics, with a good understanding of the location of the problems on various chromosomes now known. Genetics of human addiction. Heritability indexes tell us the percent of expression of a trait controlled by the genes. The genetic component can be largely overcome by other factors such as environmental influences. Here are some examples of heritability estimates based on twin studies. Male and female alcohol addiction is 55%. Thus, about 55% of alcoholism is inherited. Female marijuana addiction, 0.52. Male heroin addiction, 0.34. Male and female cigarette smoking, an incredible 0.61. These data explain a lot about why it is so difficult to stop smoking and break other addictions once they've gotten started. Pheromones impact many aspects of interpersonal behavior. Interpersonal communication is greatly impacted by purposefully and inadvertently release chemicals called pheromones. As far as is known, all mammals communicate using pheromones. Humans are usually unaware that they are releasing or sensing pheromones. Non-human mammals have been shown to use pheromones to communicate alarm, warning of danger, sexual readiness, attraction, and many other emotions. Women who live in groups, such as in dormitories or in military barracks, have menstrual synchrony unless they have blocked noses. This leads to social conflict when many women in a military unit, dorm, etc. have dysmenorrhea at the same time, or change their attraction from caring men to hunks at the same time, which leads to incredible boyfriend conflicts. Can pheromones affect your mood even if you don't know you're being exposed to them? Yes. Mood is elevated when people are exposed to either male or female pheromones, even when they have no knowledge of being exposed to pheromones. Changes are detected in brain activity as well as people's reports. Is human sexual attraction affected by pheromones? Yes. For example, a single-blind study was conducted in which 17 heterosexual men were coated with real pheromone while 21 were coated with a placebo pheromone. Logs of petting, kissing, affection, formal dates, informal dates, sexual intercourse, etc., 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 were kept and show that men coated with actual pheromones got far more affection, etc., than those coated with placebo pheromones. It is emphasized that this study showed that women were more attracted to the men wearing the actual pheromone. The women were not part of the study, and of course the men had no idea whether they were using an actual pheromone or a placebo. The impact of parasites and infections on clinically abnormal behavior among humans is becoming increasingly clear. Here are several examples of evidence that infections or our immune responses to infections can increase the odds that we'll get a mental illness. About 1% of people develop schizophrenic symptoms sometime during their lives. If the mother had the flu in early to mid-pregnancy, that rate increases to somewhere between 3 to 5%. Cytokinins can cross the placenta-fetus barrier. Increased cytokinin production can affect a fetus's brain development. Mothers with higher levels of cytokinins are more likely to give birth to schizophrenic kids. Genetic studies show that genes linked to increased likelihood of schizophrenia are involved with production of cytokinins. The parasite Toxoplasma gondii infects a large portion of the population, perhaps up to 40% in some areas. Humans born of mothers infected with T. gondii have about 2.5 times the rate of schizophrenia than those born of mothers not infected. Infected adults have been shown to be relatively more insecure and neurotic. This parasite can cross the blood-brain barrier. The parasite causes increased dopamine production in the fetus and adult, which is related to schizophrenia and a host of other behavioral problems. There is some evidence that prenatal infections with rubella and herpes may increase the odds of a child developing autism. Infection with streptococcus is correlated with sudden onset of childhood OCD. The infection itself may not produce the problems. It could be the immune response to the infection. Broken brain structures, other than the usual suspects such as strokes, impact human behavior in a wide variety of ways. Suicide and the broken serotonin transport tube system. Up to 90% of the people who commit suicide do so for unknown reasons. Nobody can figure out why they committed suicide right when they did, because there's no obvious predisposing factor which would cause them to kill themselves at that point in time. No extra stress, problems, etc. are really happening at that moment, which are all that bad. However, you can always find something. The trouble is you can find the same situations and intensities for those same people who didn't kill themselves before, and for other people who don't kill themselves. We do know that people who actually set out to successfully commit suicide reach a point of great depression. At the same time, they reach a point of great impulsiveness. Now the question is why two behaviors which normally change independently come together in a potentially disastrous way. Carol Ezell reviewed the evidence for physiological changes in the brain which result in this hard combination of behaviors occurring together. She found numerous studies showing that 1. A tiny spot near the bottom of the prefrontal cortex, just a few cubic millimeters in size, contains an area which is highly involved in control of the perceived intensity of both depression and impulsivity. The nerve cells in that tiny spot communicate with each other by using the neurotransmitter serotonin. The nerves have specially shaped receptors on their surfaces which receive serotonin released by other nerve cells. The nerve cells in this area do not make the serotonin themselves. Serotonin is made in the base of the brain and transported through tubes to the cortex. When insufficient serotonin reaches this area, the cells grow more receptors for serotonin. Comparisons of the brains of similar people who did and did not commit suicide shows that the nerve cells in this single tiny part of the brain among suicide victims did not receive sufficient serotonin to communicate because they have grown huge numbers of extra receptors. Thus, the cells are working. They just aren't getting enough serotonin to communicate with each other and the rest of the brain. The problem is not with the nerve cells, but with the serotonin transport system. The tubes break down or get clogged for some unknown reason, and the timing can be catastrophic. When insufficient serotonin reaches this area, perceived intensity of both depression and impulsivity go up, so people are very likely to feel like killing themselves and are very impulsive, so may go ahead and do it. Thus, many suicides may take place for a mainly physiological reason. Patients who report experiencing odd perceptions are not necessarily having psychological problems. Changes in electromagnetic fields of the type caused when the ground of a nearby electrical socket is intermittently loose, as well as those caused by brief changes in the Earth's magnetic field due to changes in the solar wind, are sensed by about 20% of humans. They cause changes in functions of the brain's temporal lobes, which mimic very, very minor temporal lobe epilepsy. These include the feelings that something is going on around you that you can't quite sense, fear, feelings that others are present, etc. Many young children are extraordinarily sensitive to low-frequency vibrations and electromagnetic fields. Very low power, low frequency vibrations at about 18 hertz and its harmonics happen to be the resonation point which causes the eye to vibrate, which sets off the rods at the very edge of peripheral vision. So many children see a diffuse gray image, which is always changing and moves away when they turn to look at it. The same frequencies tend to set their hackles up and cause a fight-flight response if their balance system has very thin walls, as is usual in a young child, because the vibrations are transmitted from the stirrup to the balance system instead of the hearing system. Some kids even lose their balance or become a bit disoriented and wobbly. Nutrition and digestion problems frequently result in abnormal behaviors. For example, magnesium deficiency can result in increased agitation, anxiety, confusion, depression, and insomnia. B-complex vitamin deficiency may result in increased fatigue, irritability, nervousness, depression, and insomnia. Calcium deficiencies may result in increased agitation, depression, insomnia, and irritability. Zinc deficiencies can result in changes in digestion related to a variety of eating disorders. Here are a few studies relating poor nutrition to antisocial behavior. Nutritional supplements and even vitamin deficiency has been studied over the years in relation to poor nutrition and criminal behavior. One such study points to the use of vitamin mineral supplementation on juvenile delinquents among American school children, in which children were randomly given supplements and then monitored for antisocial behavior. This study pointed to the use of a multivitamin for school children as a smart way to curb antisocial behavior. A study in 2002 involved a prison in England with 18 to 21-year-old men. They were given nutritional supplements, resulting in 25% fewer offenses compared to those prisoners given a placebo. Additionally, significant incidents, including violence, fell by about 37%. Shortly after the experiment ended, the staff reported that violence rose by 40%. Medications and diseases frequently cause abnormal behaviors. Medication side effects frequently mimic behavioral problems. Most of us are at least vaguely aware that some medications have side effects which cause behavioral problems, but we tend to look more for common physiological problems, such as stomach upsets and dry mouth. In reality, many medications cause up to a quarter of the people using them to experience severe behavioral problems, such as headaches, which many clinicians treat with behavioral interventions, such as imagery, relaxation training, and biofeedback. Medications frequently cause a wide variety of other behavioral problems, including anxiety, depression, fatigue, and etc. Too many clinicians forget to check the side effects of medications before initiating behavioral interventions for common abnormal behaviors. One really sad mistake is when the literature shows that the side effect is rare, so the clinician goes ahead and ignores it. But just because it's rare doesn't mean that your patient isn't experiencing it. Here's a list of some of the medications which are commonly associated with high incidence of headache. Diseases causing behavioral changes. A superficial review of the literature turned up over 100 different diseases causing pathological behaviors. Many times, behavior changes before the disease is detected by chemical tests, or the disease causes the person to feel sick. A few examples include thyroid disorders, which can lead to memory problems, various types of poisoning, including lead poisoning, and many infections. This is the end of the brief tour of the body's effects on our clinically important behaviors. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like more information on the impact of physiology on behavior, you may be interested in the clinically oriented course, Biological Basis of Behavior, presented by the Behavioral Medicine Research and Training Foundation. For more information on our courses, please visit our website, www.behavemedfoundation.org. Thanks for attending.